Before we begin the story, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts on what humanity's greatest strength really is, and subscribe for more tales where humans reshape the galaxy in ways no alien could predict. Now let's dive in. The galaxy had long whispered of a creature called the Night Fong. In council halls, in barracks, even in the hushed warnings of parents to their children, its name carried the taste of dread. To most, it was a phantom stitched together from too many battlefield rumors. To others, it was a certainty, a predator so savage that fleets vanished when it prowled. Ships reported shredded hulls, outposts reduced to torn metal and bone, and soldiers left in silence where no retreat signal ever came. Tonight the whispers became steel. Fleets had gathered in orbit over a barren moon, banners of alien empires hanging like storm clouds across the void. War drums thundered in electronic beats through comms, admirals declaring in unison, the predator's time was over. From the viewing deck of the high chamber, alien commanders sneered at humanity's envoy. They saw him as little more than a fragile man among titans, soft where their kind were forged sharp. Humans had been admitted to the galactic stage only a generation ago, tolerated for their resourcefulness but mocked for their sentimentality. "You cannot reason with it," growled a scaled admiral whose voice reverberated through his plated throat. "The Night Fong is not a creature of survival, it is malice incarnate. We burn it from the stars or it will feast again." The envoy, a thin man with a clipped beard and pale eyes, tried once more to inject caution. "You mistake instinct for intent. We barely understand what drives it." "Silence," another commander hissed, mandibles clacking. "When the fire rains tonight, all will see the beast turn to ash." No one listened. The council had chosen fear over patience, war over inquiry. While the fleets arrayed their dreadnoughts and strike wings, far from the grand chamber and its blinding lights, a man named Elias Merrick scrubbed blood from his hands. Elias was a field medic, though field had long lost meaning. His battlefield was anywhere that men and women bled, abandoned trenches, shattered hull corridors, even the dust-choked edges of colonies forgotten by those who once claimed them. He carried little more than a pack stuffed with emergency tools and the unyielding resolve to keep hearts beating where others gave up. Colleagues called him reckless. Admirals called him expendable. Those who had lain on his operating cloth and woken to another sunrise called him something else entirely: stubborn hope. This night found him hunched over a dying soldier in a canvas-walled infirmary pitched near the plague camps of Chiron 4. The warlords had fled the region, but the fever remained, gnawing through the lungs of the abandoned. Elias had been warned not to go. No protection, no backup, only shadows in the hills and sickness in the air. He had gone anyway. He always did. "Stay with me," Elias whispered, stitching a wound as the patient rasped shallow breaths. His voice carried no command, only insistence that life remain when it wanted to slip away. The soldier survived the night, but Elias did not sleep. He rarely did. He left the camp at dawn, searching the ridges for medicinal roots and moss that helped break fever when supplies ran dry. It was a ritual now: leave at first light, return with what little nature offered. That morning, as clouds scud low and gray across the sky, he felt the weight of being watched. He froze mid-step, pack slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the rock-strewn slope. Nothing moved. No insect chirped. Only silence, deep and holding, like the air itself had paused. A shadow shifted between two boulders. Then came the glint of eyes, two burning coals fixed on him. Elias' heart clenched. He had seen men gutted, soldiers torn apart, outposts erased by claw marks that no weapon could account for. The stories returned in a rush: black hide, muscle layered upon muscle, claws that sliced armored plating like paper. The Night Fong. It should have pounced. It should have ripped him into red memory and left bones for the carrion birds. Instead it stayed. Watching. Waiting. Elias did the only thing that made sense to him, though it made no sense at all. He lowered his pack slowly, drew from it a strip of dried meat, ration he could ill afford to spare, and laid it on the rock between them. He stepped back, pulse pounding in his ears. The eyes did not blink. A low growl curled through the air, deeper than thunder, older than words. Then the shadow moved forward. Massive shoulders rolled as it stepped into view, body scarred by old battles, chest heaving with slow, deliberate breaths. Its claws tapped the stone. It lowered its head. And in one swift motion, it snatched the meat and withdrew again. Elias stood rooted, every instinct shrieking at him to run, every lesson in survival howling at the madness of staying. Yet he remained, breath shallow, gaze steady. When at last the beast melted back into the ridges, Elias whispered under his breath, So you bleed and you hunger. Not so different, are you? That was weeks ago. Since then, the shadow had lingered at the edge of his errands, never approaching openly, never vanishing entirely. A guardian or a predator waiting for patience to pay off, Elias could not tell. He only knew that the plague camp remained untouched, raiders vanished before they could strike, and at night, when the winds howled too loud, there was a second set of tracks outside his tent. The galaxy believed the predator nothing but a scourge. Elias had glimpsed something else, pain, hunger, and a choice not to kill when it could have. It had seen him too, and chosen patience. Now fleets were burning across the stars to exterminate it. Councils clamored for its corpse. And Elias, standing in the dust of Chiron 4 with his satchel of herbs and blood-stained hands, wondered if the galaxy had already condemned what it never tried to understand. The sky rumbled with distant engines, faint but growing. He looked up, eyes narrowing at the streaks of light carving across the clouds. War was coming. Not for him, not for his patience, but for the shadow that had spared him in the ridges. He wiped sweat from his brow and shouldered his pack. "They don't know you, do they?" he murmured to the empty air. "But I've seen you. And I'll be damned if I let them burn you without a fight." The horizon glowed faintly red, the first sign of fleets breaking atmosphere. Elias started back toward camp, each step deliberate, carrying the knowledge that the night ahead would decide not just the fate of a predator, but the place of a human medic in a war written by fear. And in the rocks above, unseen yet certain, two burning eyes followed him down. The bombardment shook the ridges for 3 days and nights. From the plague camp below, Elias could feel the tremors under his feet as fire rained from the heavens. The sky split with the scream of energy lances and the bone-deep rumble of capital guns firing from orbit. The patients huddled in their tents, clutching their chests and whispering prayers to gods they hadn't spoken to in years. Elias worked by lantern light, sealing wounds and cooling fevered brows while dust sifted down with every distant impact. He knew the fleets weren't aiming for the camp. They were aiming for something far worse. On the fourth dawn, silence came. It was a silence that felt wrong, like the pause in a heartbeat before it stopped for good. Elias could not sit still. He left the camp with his pack and his knife, ignoring the desperate pleas from those he treated. He told them he would return with more herbs, but the truth clawed inside his chest. He needed to know what the fleets had done, needed to see with his own eyes what the firestorms had left behind. He walked until the hills grew jagged and blackened, until the scent of scorched earth burned his nostrils. The ground was gouged with deep furrows, as if something had clawed its way through the stone itself. Charred wreckage lay scattered across the slopes, fragments of strike drones, shattered into twisted skeletons. The air shimmered with heat, and a fine haze of ash clung to his skin. That was when he heard it. A sound low and ragged, not thunder, not wind. A groan. Elias froze, every muscle tightening. He followed the sound cautiously, one hand on the strap of his pack. Around a jagged rise of stone he saw it. The predator. It lay half buried in rubble, its massive chest heaving in shallow, uneven breaths. Plates of obsidian hide were cracked and scorched, some peeled back to expose dark muscle glistening with blood. One clawed forearm twitched feebly, its edge sunk into the dirt like an anchor. The eyes that once burned like fire dimmed now, flickering with pain. Elias' instincts screamed at him to run. To hide, to vanish, to survive. This was the monster that entire fleets feared, the nightmare that had consumed worlds. And yet, he saw not a demon but a creature drowning in its own blood, brought low by wounds too savage to mend themselves. He should have left. He could have turned, fled, and let history record the predator's end without his interference. Humanity might have even thanked him for staying out of the way. But Elias had made a vow long ago, whispered over the body of a soldier he could not save. As long as someone still drew breath, he would not walk away. He dropped his pack and knelt. The predator's eyes flickered open. For a moment, Elias thought the end had come, that claws would rip through his chest before he drew another breath. But the beast did not strike. It only stared, one eye bloodshot and clouding, the other still glowing faintly. A growl rumbled deep in its throat, weak but filled with warning. "I know," Elias whispered, his voice hoarse. "You could kill me with a twitch. But if I walk away you'll die. And I don't walk away." He opened his pack, pulling out sealant foam, bone clamps, and a spool of surgical thread. His hands shook as he cleaned the largest wound, a gash across the beast's ribs so wide he could see the pulse of its heart beneath. He sprayed foam, stitching it with trembling precision while the predator's body convulsed with low growls. Twice it lifted its claws, once resting them against his shoulder. Elias froze each time, feeling the sharpness bite through his jacket. But the claws did not descend. The hours bled together. He cut away scorched flesh, bandaged fractures, improvised transfusions with blood packs meant for alien soldiers whose physiology came close. The predator bled more than any creature he had seen, its lifeblood soaking the earth until his hands and arms were stained black to the elbows. Yet it endured. When exhaustion nearly claimed him, Elias staggered back, chest heaving. The predator's breathing was steadier now, the worst wounds sealed, the heart still beating beneath ribs bound in crude bandages. Its eyes, once dim, studied him with a strange focus. Elias felt pinned by that gaze, as though the beast weighed him on some scale far older than words. Night fell. Elias dared not return to the camp. He built a fire inside the cave where the predator had crawled to hide, warming his numb fingers while he watched its chest rise and fall. Sleep dragged at him, but every time he closed his eyes, the memory of its gaze returned, watchful, waiting. Days followed. Elias hunted what little game he could snare in the ridges, dragging it back to the cave. The predator ate in silence, tearing the meat into ribbons with careful motions. Sometimes, after feeding, it would drop scraps near his fire. An offering or a test, Elias could not tell. He began speaking aloud as he worked, not because he thought it understood, but because silence weighed too heavily. You've got more scars than anyone I've patched up. Can't imagine how many battles you've walked through. He snorted softly. But you're not walking through this one without help. One night, as he stitched a minor tear along its forearm, the beast released a sound different from its growls. A guttural rumble, broken and uneven. At first Elias thought it pain. Then, slowly he realized the rhythm was no accident. The sound shaped itself, clumsy, distorted. It was trying to mimic Elias. The word was almost lost in gravel, but it was there. Elias dropped his needle, stunned. The beast's glowing eyes studied him, unblinking. You learned my name, he whispered, heart hammering. The predator made the sound again, clearer this time, the syllables vibrating in its massive chest. Elias could only laugh softly, shaking his head. Guess that makes us something more than enemies. Weeks bled together. Wounds closed, though scars remained. The predator grew stronger, each day rising higher, pacing the cave with restless energy. It followed him now when he left to gather supplies, padding silently through the rocks, always close but never closer than a shadow. When raiders stumbled upon Elias one morning, rifles raised, the predator moved faster than he could blink. Screams ended in silence, blood staining the dirt, and the survivors fled in terror. The beast returned to Elias' side, lowering its head as if awaiting reprimand. Elias only exhaled shakily. You saved me. The bond deepened in that silence. A medic and a monster, neither belonging anywhere, bound by wounds and choices. At last, the day came when the predator stood fully healed at the cave mouth. Its frame filled the light, scars gleaming like battle honors. Elias felt the weight of its power again, raw and untamed. He braced himself, wondering if this was the moment it chose to finish what fate had spared. Instead, the beast lowered its head, a gesture brief but unmistakable, before stepping past him into the open. Elias stood stunned, realization settling in his chest like fire. He had not tamed it, not conquered it. They had chosen each other. That night, as Elias returned to the plague camp, he noticed the silence. No raiders prowled, no beast stalked the ridges. Only the steady rhythm of footsteps behind him, heavy but sure, a presence too immense to mistake. The predator walked in his shadow, not as a hunter but as something far stranger. And when the patients in the camp stirred at the sight of the towering creature, gasping in terror, Elias raised his voice over their cries. Don't fear. It's with me. The words felt like the edge of a storm, a declaration that could not be taken back. The predator stood at his side, silent and terrible, yet unmoving. Above them, far beyond the sky, fleets regrouped for their next strike, convinced the predator still hunted alone. They had no idea that when they came again, it would not stand as a beast apart. It would stand guarding a human medic. The council chamber shimmered with blue light as fleets broadcast their reports across the galaxy. Commanders stood in shimmering holograms, each voice dripping with triumph as they described the bombardments, the strikes, the firestorms they had unleashed upon the predator's lair. Yet beneath the bravado lurked unease. No one had seen the corpse. No scanners had captured its final heartbeat. Ships sent to confirm the kill had vanished without signal, their last transmissions cut short by static and screams. Fear turned to resolve. The council declared total eradication. No longer would piecemeal strikes suffice. This time the combined power of 5 empires would descend together, an armada meant to blot out the stars. The predator, they swore, would burn until not even ashes remained. In the corners of the chamber, humanity's representatives watched in silence. They were not consulted, not trusted. Their role was little more than token witness, a reminder of the fragile species allowed into the council's orbit only by reluctant necessity. They were seen as soft, sentimental, unreliable when decisive extermination was needed. The counselors smirked at their silence, certain the humans had no voice worth hearing. Yet one of those humans was not silent at all. On Chiron 4, Elias Merrick felt the ripples of what the council planned long before the first fleets arrived. He had seen the predator rise from wounds that would have ended lesser creatures. He had walked beside it through the ridges, seen it shield his patients from raiders, watched its glowing eyes track him with something far sharper than instinct. He knew the fleets were not preparing to kill a monster, they were preparing to trigger a storm no armada could contain. Rumors had already begun to spread. The first came from the plague camp. A merchant caravan, seeking to scavenge supplies, had stumbled upon the sight of a towering black beast crouched at the edge of the tents, its scarred frame gleaming in moonlight. They fled in terror, but not before seeing Elias lay his hand on its flank, whispering calm as if speaking to a patient. Word traveled faster than any courier. The night Fong walked beside a human. Others confirmed it. Patrols returned babbling of monstrous claws scattering raiders, of a medic standing unscathed where no man should have survived. Some called him blessed, others cursed. The council dismissed these tales as superstition. But soldiers who had faced the predator before heard the stories and faltered. The idea that such a nightmare would obey a human was more frightening than the beast itself. Elias ignored the whispers. He focused on his patients, stitching wounds, calming fever, teaching frightened survivors that the beast outside their tents was not their executioner. It stood watch in silence, its hulking frame still as stone, eyes burning against the night. Children cried at first, then grew curious, daring each other to peek at the shadow that guarded them. One child, too weak to rise from his cot, whispered through cracked lips, "Is it your dog?" Elias had smiled faintly, though the truth was far stranger. Yet he could not ignore the looming storm forever. He knew fleets were moving. He saw it in the restless way the predator stalked the ridges, sniffing the air as if scenting war. He felt it in the silence of the stars overhead, too heavy, too still, as though waiting for engines to split it open. One night, unable to sleep, Elias sat at the edge of the camp with the predator crouched nearby. Its breath steamed in the chill, slow and steady. He spoke aloud, though he was not sure if the creature understood. "They're coming for you. For us maybe. 1,000 ships, maybe more. And I don't know if even you can tear through that many." The predator growled low, not in threat but in something closer to dismissal. Its claws flexed once in the dirt as if answering without words, "Let them come." Elias stared at the sky. "You saved me when you didn't have to. I saved you when I should have run. Whatever this is between us, it's not just survival anymore." His hand brushed against its scarred hide. The beast did not move. When dawn came, the air was split by the thunder of engines. Streaks of fire lanced across the horizon as the first wave of fleet ships descended into atmosphere. Villagers and plague victims alike screamed in terror, convinced the end had come. Elias steadied them with what little calm he could muster, but his own heart pounded like a drum. Above them, the armada unfolded like a dark canopy, blotting out the sun. Dreadnoughts lined in formation, wings of fighters wheeling like insects around them, troop carriers dropping toward the surface. The ground trembled beneath the roar of their descent. This was no surgical strike. This was an execution. The predator rose to its full height, a shadow against the flaming sky. It stood between the camp and the descending fleet, muscles coiled, claws glinting. Every patient, every child, every soul in the camp felt the raw force of its presence. Some cowered. Others stared in awe. Elias moved to its side, jaw tight, refusing to retreat. He could not protect his patients with weapons, but he could stand, unyielding, beside the only shield they had. His voice was steady, though it trembled inside. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me." The predator lowered its head slightly as if acknowledging the vow. Its burning eyes fixed on the skies, waiting. The first strike lances hit the ridges, tearing stone into fire. Troop carriers disgorged soldiers in armored ranks, weapons raised, voices sharp with rehearsed hatred. They had been told to expect carnage, to fight a beast that would tear through them mindlessly. They were not told it would be standing sentinel over a camp of the sick, with a human medic at its side. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Commanders barked orders insisting the stories were lies. But the truth loomed before them. The predator was not attacking. It was guarding. And the human standing beneath its shadow looked back at them without fear. The armada tightened its formation overhead. Energy cannons charged, fleets readying to erase the ridges from orbit if ground troops faltered. Elias clenched his fists, every nerve braced for the storm. The predator's growl rolled like thunder across the valley, a promise of violence restrained only by choice. Soldiers hesitated, hands tightening on triggers. They had expected slaughter. Instead, they faced a truth their leaders had never prepared them to believe. The sky burned brighter. Engines roared. The battle to decide what the predator truly was had begun. Not in orbit, not in council chambers, but here on the dirt where a human medic refused to run. And as the first volleys rained down, the predator surged forward, not into mindless fury, but into a defense that would shatter the lies of empires. The ridges ignited in fire. The first salvo of energy lances tore the ground apart, sending shards of stone hurtling through the air like shrapnel. The camp shook, canvas tents collapsing, patients screaming as they clutched at each other. Elias threw himself over a wounded man, shielding him with his own body as the earth convulsed. Dust choked the air, glowing orange under the fury of orbital bombardments. Through the chaos, a single figure remained unshaken. The predator roared, its voice reverberating like a shockwave that silenced even the thunder of cannons for a heartbeat. It leapt forward, a black blur against burning sky, and landed on a slope where a squad of soldiers had just disembarked. Their rifles lit in panic, streams of plasma scorching the rocks. The predator's claws scythed through the barrage, faster than their eyes could follow. Armor split like paper, screams cut short as bodies fell in a spray of sparks and blood. The soldiers had expected a beast to charge in blind rage, a monster of instinct. Instead, they watched in horror as it fought with precision. It struck only those advancing toward the camp, never straying, never wasting a motion. Its massive frame interposed itself again and again between the wounded and the advancing troops, an unyielding wall of flesh and fury. Elias rose from the dust, coughing, eyes burning but sharp. He shouted over the din, his voice hoarse but commanding. "Fall back from the tents. Get the patients to the inner ridge." His hands were steady as he pulled survivors from collapsing shelters, dragging them toward what cover remained. Every movement drew the predator closer, circling him like a living shield. From above, fleet commanders barked conflicting orders. Battlecams transmitted the impossible image back to the armada. The Night Fong, scourge of worlds, standing guard over a medic tending the weak. Commanders demanded the feeds cut, but the footage spread too fast, filling the screens of soldiers across orbit. The lie unraveled in real time. On the ground, strike teams hesitated. They had been taught the predator would rip through anything alive. Yet it waited when Elias raised his hand, its claws retracting, growls simmering low but restrained. Soldiers aiming at the medic found themselves unable to fire when the beast crouched around him protectively, eyes burning with silent threat. Then came the mistake. The flagship, orbiting high above, locked its cannons on the camp itself. It had no patience for hesitation, no interest in the lives of plague victims or the honor of ground troops. Its only directive was annihilation. The sky glowed white as targeting arrays fixed on Elias' coordinates. The predator stiffened, sensing the coming strike. Elias looked up, the light blinding against his eyes, and in that instant he knew what the fleets had chosen. Not to fight a beast, but to wipe clean everything it touched, him included. The predator moved. It leapt higher than seemed possible, claws digging into a descending troop carrier, ripping its hull open with a scream of tortured metal. Soldiers tumbled into the void as the beast launched itself again, bounding from debris to debris, climbing into the sky like a living missile. With a roar that tore the air, it slammed into the flagship's forward guns. The cannons buckled, their barrels crumpling like tin. Explosions rippled across the warship's hull, fire licking the void. The armada reeled. Orders collapsed into chaos as the predator shredded weapons arrays and tore through fighter wings. It was not rage but purpose that guided it, every strike aimed at systems targeting the surface. Within minutes, the flagship's guns fell silent, crippled beyond repair. On the ground, silence rippled among soldiers who had braced for the medic's death. Elias stood in the dust, his hands still pressed to a patient's wounds, staring at the impossible sight of the predator battling warships among the clouds. His heart pounded with fear and awe, but more than that, with vindication. The beast was not rampaging. It was defending. An alien captain, struck in crossfire near the ridge, fell to the dirt with blood pouring from his chest. Without hesitation, Elias sprinted to him. He dropped to his knees, pulling gauze and foam from his kit. The captain's eyes widened in disbelief as human hands pressed against his wound, sealing arteries, pushing air back into failing lungs. Beside them, the predator landed heavily, its body smoking with scorch marks, eyes blazing as it crouched low. The soldiers watching froze, seeing what their leaders had sworn was impossible. Predator and human working as one, sparing even those who came to kill them. The captain wheezed, breath returning. Elias looked him in the eye, voice steady. "You'll live, but only if your men stand down. This doesn't have to be slaughter." The soldiers faltered. Their rifles lowered, not from command but from truth they could no longer deny. The monster their empires had sworn to erase now stood motionless, waiting on a medic's word. Above, the fleet scrambled, confused, fractured. Orders clashed. Some demanded retreat, others called for renewed bombardment. But hesitation spread faster than command. No one wanted to fire first when every lens in orbit was recording the medic's hand resting against the beast's scarred hide. The predator snarled as another ship descended, its cannons glowing with lethal intent. Elias raised his arm without thinking, palm outward. The predator froze mid-step, growl vibrating through the earth, but it did not attack. The soldiers stared, breath held, at a sight that shattered every tale they had believed. The night Fong obeying a human's command. The ship above fired anyway. A column of energy lanced downward, aimed not at the predator but at Elias himself. In that instant, the bond sealed in blood and choice reached its breaking point. The predator surged upward, intercepting the blast with its body. The energy seared across its chest, burning deep, but it held firm. With a roar that rattled stone loose from the cliffs, it launched itself into the air, ripping into the ship's hull. Metal screamed, fire blossomed, and the craft spiraled into ruin. Elias shielded his eyes as debris rained down, heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. When the smoke cleared, the predator stood again, scorched but unbroken, eyes fixed on him alone. The fleets wavered. Commanders argued across channels, voices cracking with panic. The soldiers on the ground lowered their weapons completely. No one moved. The story they had been fed was gone, replaced by the undeniable truth before their eyes. Elias knelt beside the alien captain he had saved, tightening bandages, his own voice raw from dust and shouting. He did not look at the soldiers, did not speak to the fleets. His words were meant for the man gasping under his hands. "You see it now. It doesn't protect because I command it. It protects because it chooses to." The predator crouched beside him, its massive frame curling protectively, claws sunk deep into the dirt. Together they formed a tableau so powerful it spread across every battle cam in orbit. The universe's most feared predator kneeling beside a human medic, guarding the weak against the full force of 5 empires. Above, the flagship limped away, flames licking its wounded hull. Fleets hesitated at the edge of retreat. Ground troops stood in stunned silence, weapons forgotten. The war that was meant to end in extermination had instead torn open a truth too dangerous to ignore. And in the dust of the ridge, Elias met the predator's burning gaze, knowing this was only the beginning. The galaxy had seen and nothing could unsee it. The chamber of the galactic tribunal shimmered with sterile light, vast enough to hold the egos of 5 empires and still feel hollow. Delegates from worlds scattered across the stars sat in rising tiers, their scaled, feathered, or carapaced forms draped in finery that reeked of power. The council convened to deliver judgment on a war they believed already decided. They had summoned Elias only to confirm the narrative they had built, that the predator had been exterminated and that the human was incidental. When the doors opened, the silence was palpable. Elias entered not as a broken prisoner but upright, shoulders squared though fatigue clung to every inch of him. Dust still marked his boots, scars still banded his hands, and his medic satchel rested stubbornly at his side. Behind him came the thunder of claws against stone. The predator entered, towering, burned but unbowed, its amber eyes glowing like molten suns. Every delegate flinched, some rising instinctively as if to flee. The council guards raised weapons, but the predator merely stood at Elias' shoulder, posture low, gaze sweeping across the chamber with lethal calm. It did not advance. It did not need to. Its presence alone was a blade pressed against the throats of nations. A booming voice echoed from the dais. High Arbiter Salvek, robed in shimmering crimson, slammed a clawed hand against his gavel. "This creature is forbidden in the tribunal's chamber. Guards, remove it." No one moved. The guards' hands shook, rifles wavering, but their eyes remained locked on the predator that had reduced warships to drifting husks. Not one dared step closer. Elias' voice carried through the chamber, steady but edged with steel. You invited me here to speak truth. The truth does not come without him. Murmurs erupted. Some scoffed, others whispered of blasphemy. Salvek bared his teeth. You bring an abomination as counsel? You expect this council to acknowledge a beast? Elias lifted his chin. I expect you to acknowledge what every fleet broadcast across the stars. He is not your beast. He is not your myth of terror. He chose to defend the wounded when your soldiers would have left them to burn. He stood against annihilation when your fleets unleashed fire. He is no more a monster than I am. The predator's gaze met the arbiter's, unblinking. Its chest rose and fell with quiet growls, but it made no move, waiting as if Elias' words bound it more surely than chains. Another delegate, feathered and silver-eyed, leaned forward, voice sharp with curiosity. You claim choice. Do you say this predator thinks? That it decides its own path? Elias spread his scarred hands, palms open. He decided to protect me. He decided to protect those you call enemies. He decides every moment not to kill in this very chamber. Tell me, is that instinct, or will? The silence that followed was heavier than any bombardment. Delegates shifted uneasily. Some could not meet the predator's eyes. Others looked at Elias as if seeing a weapon forged not of steel but conviction. Arbiter Salvek snarled. Lies and theatrics. The feeds were illusions, edited by cowards seeking to spread rebellion. The predator is dangerous, uncontrollable. And you, his claw stabbed toward Elias, you are a human, one world among dust, daring to lecture the stars. Elias did not waver. You called him uncontrollable. Yet he stands here, still, silent, waiting. Not for your command. Not for mine. For his own judgment. Can you say the same for your fleets, Arbiter? Do they wait for reason before they fire? Or do they burn without thought? A ripple of uneasy murmurs surged through the chamber. The predator shifted slightly, its massive frame pressing close enough that Elias could feel the heat of its breath on his shoulder. But it did not snarl. It let the words hang like a blade above the council. An unexpected voice cut through the tension. A captain who had once fought against Elias rose from the observer's tier. Bandages still marked his chest where Elias had saved his life. His uniform bore the crest of the very fleet that had bombarded the ridge. He bowed stiffly, an act that shocked half the chamber, and spoke. I saw it with my own eyes. The human spared me when he could have let me die. The predator did not strike me, though I was his enemy. If these are lies, then my scars are lies too. The chamber erupted. Voices shouted, accusations flying, denials mixing with reluctant agreement. Salvek roared for silence, but the order rang hollow. The myth was unraveling faster than his claws could grip it. Elias stepped forward, his voice rising above the clamor. You sent fleets to destroy what you did not understand. You expected a monster. Instead you found loyalty. You expected mindless slaughter. Instead you found choice. You cannot cage what you fear with lies forever. The galaxy has already seen. The predator raised its head, a deep growl building until it filled the chamber. Delegates froze, their protests stifled by primal terror. But the predator did not lunge. It lowered itself instead, crouching until its massive skull rested near Elias' side. A gesture of allegiance, not to power, not to empire, but to one man. The image seared itself into every mind in the chamber. The monster that had haunted generations now knelt, not defeated, but allied. Not enslaved, but choosing. Salvek's face twisted with fury. You threaten the order of the stars, human. You would unmake the fear that keeps the peace. Do you not see? If one predator can be tamed, then no throne is safe. No empire secure. Elias' reply came like a scalpel. Then perhaps it is not peace you built, but chains. And chains always break. The predator roared. Not the sound of rage this time, but of triumph, a thunderous declaration that rattled the very foundations of the hall. Windows shattered, banners trembled, and every delegate knew the universe had shifted. Some rose in defiance, others in awe. Armies across the stars would feel the echo of that roar, soldiers who had seen the feeds, civilians who whispered of the medic and the beast. The legend was no longer theirs to shape. It belonged to everyone who had seen the truth. Elias stood unwavering in the center, hand resting on the predator's scarred hide. His voice, though quiet, carried farther than Salvek's fury. You wanted to kill a monster. You created a guardian. The chamber quaked with voices, some cursing, some hailing, all unable to undo what had been spoken. And in that storm of revelation, Elias knew this was no end. It was the first tremor of something far greater. The Predator's loyalty was not just his shield. It was the spark that would burn across empires, a truth no fleet could silence, no arbiter could crush. As the council dissolved into chaos, the Predator rose to its full height, eyes blazing. Together, Elias and his unlikely guardian turned from the dais. The chamber doors opened, light spilling in, a path forward carved not by decree but by defiance. The galaxy outside waited, fearful, trembling and ready to change. And with every step, claws echoing beside boots, they walked not as hunter and prey, but as allies who had undone an empire with nothing more dangerous than choice.